All right, Jen, do you want to put on your Princess Jen cap for this next segment?
All right,
Please start with your dad.
if we have
He's very familiar with Princess Jen.
Princess Jen.
have you met her? She's awful, isn't she? Yeah.
He raised her.
Yeah.
He created her.
Good luck with this.
King Raj.
Yeah. All right. So
A lot of pressure.
now I totally want to give you one where you're going to have to say that you have to stage it.
Please do.
Okay. So let's say that you have a seller, and that seller has lived in their home for 30 years, and it is very 90s. It's kind of dated. So you have kind of a dated property, and to them it's not dated, so they don't feel it's dated. And then they do need to sell because they're going to be downsizing, but they have a neighbor, and that neighbor has tons and tons of junk. So you have a dated house and you have tons of junk next door. How would you handle that?
Well, if you've got a neighbor who is a slob, this is a real problem. As a realtor, I guess I would ask the people how they evaluated the neighbor, and it would be possible to ask the neighbor to clean up his place, which would be probably the realtor's job rather than to ask the seller to do it because he and she have been living with it. But if it's a real junk pile next door, it can kill the sale. It just isn't going to sell. And maybe you even offer the neighbor some money or some assistance in getting rid of what is a real deal killer.
Have you ever had that in the past, Roger?
I'm sure I have, although I don't recall a specific incident, but there are certainly sales that are inhibited because the neighboring property is just run down and unattractive, and nobody wants to live next to it. It can be a real problem because the neighbor whom you approach and say, "Can we maybe get this cleaned up?" may just say, "Go to hell."
Which is probably likely.
Yeah, it is. I actually had one of those situations, and it was a long, long time ago, so I don't remember the specifics, but I remember they had like this horrifically huge, messy boat, and there was all of this stuff like junked in the yard, but nobody actually lived at the house. They just kind of kept stuff there. So I was able to reach them and ask them if it was okay if I just picked up their yard and if they could get the boat out. And I don't remember if I had to offer them money to get the boat out, but they did move the boat and I cleaned up the yard. So sometimes
Full service.
you have to, but I mean, it was necessary because I mean, you pulled up and you were like, well, what's that thing over there? So
having a neighbor who is a slob may be a motivating factor for the person who wants to sell. So
In that case, staging probably does not matter.
So then you clean up their yard and you're like, you know what? I don't really want to move anymore. They're looking good.
But it didn't. The yard didn't bother the seller at all. They didn't care, and they just sort of thought it was a whatever thing. But when you're trying to get top dollar, it's like, okay, what can we do to make this? And I think on a couple of our first showings, I had gotten feedback about the house next door, and I thought, all right, let's fix this. So we did.
Yeah, people who are buying certainly are concerned with the neighborhood, the immediate houses on either side and across the street, and the houses on the street. And I have often suggested to people that if they want to find out about the neighborhood and are seriously considering making an offer, ring a few doorbells and say, "We're thinking of buying that house. Can you tell me how many kids live in the neighborhood when the bus runs, da-da-da, I don't think anybody ever does it. But they should. because I don't know all of those answers for every house in town, and maybe some people have done that, and it at least gives them an option for quelling their concerns about the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. All right, Ben, are you ready?
Lay it on me.
Okay. So you have a seller, and the seller of the property, they had been on previously with another agent, and they had their price very, very high, like higher than market value. And now they are jaded, but they have a opportunity to move out of state for a job. How do you go about helping them to get sold when they've had a bad experience before and been priced very, very high?
That's a good question. I guess, doing your homework and being familiar with other comparable properties and trying to kind of dial the seller back into the realm of reality as far as, maybe trying to paint the big picture where their house sits in comparison with other similar properties, and then kind of maybe go through the explanation of when it comes to listing your property, there's a number of different strategies. There's the needle in the haystack approach where you're trying to set an all-time, a record for a high sale. And oftentimes, like you mentioned, if you're priced on the high end of the spectrum, you might get a buyer, but the buyer might not have been born yet.
There's that.
Your house can sit on the property for a long time. And if the seller has experienced that, then they know what you're talking about. So again, most people, when they do sell their property, they think it's a gold mine. And that always is a challenge to kind of try to dial people back into getting them within the norm of what's going to sell. And again, our goal as real estate agents is to try to help get people to where they want to go. So if they want to move and they have to sell, then they have to be realistic, and we'll certainly try to do whatever we can do to get them the best price. But again, it's, I'd say, doing the homework and trying to get them more comfortable with what is, what other houses are selling for that are comparable.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
A really good way to get more realism from a seller is to send reports on showings. Mm-hmm. And I do that without fail, and the prospective buyer and their realtor will recite all of the deficiencies of the property, and I don't have to tell the seller about those. They're being told by people who are looking at the property, people who are showing the property, and it's just kind of a drip, drip, drip process. The husband comes home at night and says, Gertrude, did the house showing go well yesterday? And she says, no, we got the report. They don't like it either. And this has an impact on motivation and pricing, which is certainly important in getting properties sold in most markets.
And Gertrude tells him to lower the price.
Gertrude says, they didn't like it again. It's never going to sell.
That's right.
I think Gertrude's the new trending baby name for this year.
Is it
Really?
It should be.
What?
It should be. That should
Yeah.
be the new old.
Gertie?
It's the one that's gonna sell
You're so
Ben's
full of
house.
Yeah, because it wasn't born yet.
Yeah.
So it's not this year, it's
Oh,
future years.
Yeah.
Because
Gertie.
Gertie has not been born yet.
Oh, Gertie.
Mm-hmm. That's funny.
Gerd unit. All right.
If you like content like this, consider watching some of these other videos, hitting the subscribe button. If you want to know what your house is currently worth, go to hometeamforyou.com and look at the free evaluation tool.